Okay, welcome back to the podcast. My name is Luke. This is John, our senior pastor here at Hope Christian Church. Welcome to the Be the Way podcast. We're going to first ask a follow-up question or two based off of my sermon just to get the pastor's thoughts, but then we're going to dive into this sermon the next week. So, I talked a bit about people having enlightenment moments and stuff like that. And that really made me start thinking about the different interpretations that people have. Because I talked about people grow up thinking a certain way, or they are stuck in this before and after thought of after I accept Jesus, then my life's totally different, and then nothing happens afterwards. So I just wanted to first ask about a brief history about what happened after Jesus returned from heaven, and specifically how and what the disciples were teaching.
And so we have a lot of different views on different things, because when the disciples, Jesus ascends back up into heaven, they start preaching and teaching, and it starts spreading out over those first couple hundred years. Mm-hmm. Lots of persecution, but with every persecution, it was like Christianity just kept spreading. They would just move from where they were being persecuted at and keep on going. And it spread throughout the whole known world until eventually the whole Roman Empire accepted Christianity as the dominant religion. And then we went through this whole Dark Ages after several hundred years. And the Dark Ages, that medieval time period, and that was a time where Christianity got suppressed. And because of that, when the Renaissance time, when that time period was over and the Renaissance came and people were starting to split away from the Roman Catholic Church and spreading out, you started getting less consistency in views of how things were supposed to be, because you had all these different people that didn't really cooperate with each other because there was so much persecution. They were afraid they're going to be killed. And so they would go to Germany, or they would go to Ireland, or they would go over here to what is now Sweden or the UK, as we know. I mean, they spread out all over the place, but they didn't like to coordinate too much because there was this overlying, we're going against Catholicism, so we might be put to death. And so you started getting where, instead of being able to have people that would help check and make sure that, oh, what about this? And they could talk about it. They just kind of formed their own belief system around one person. And just like in college, you have different professors that help mold where you need to go. When you only have you, sometimes you can get, and so things started getting a little bit where they would start definitely different views, predestination, where it's okay, well, everything's already decided, there's nothing I can do about it. And a lot of people in our culture, whether they go to church or not, kind of believe that. They just kind of go through the motions, and there's nothing I can do pro or against. I mean, that's just how it is. But all those kind of stem from back when the church got isolated out. Now we're starting to try to come in, but then you're trying to overcome these views that you've always had. And that's a challenge.
Yeah,
definitely.
So would you say then that all these different interpretations happened after the split, or was there oh hey, Simon Peter really cares about this one thing, so he's preaching about this, and then Thomas is preaching about this, and then after the Roman Catholic Empire kind of combined everything, is that when the interpretations changed, or why are there so many interpretations?
Well, there is a portion of that. When you read James, so the book of James out of the New Testament, Jesus' half-brother, he's dealing with a very legalistic mindset, and that he grew up Jewish. He's running the Jerusalem church, which is pretty much all Jews for the most part. There's a few Gentiles, but it is dominant Jew. All these people coming out of that Jewish culture. Well, when you come into Christianity, yeah, there's a Jewish background to it, but you're changing things that they have been practicing forever. Mm-hmm. And so there's reasons why they were meeting on the Sabbath and not necessarily on a Sunday or any other day. All that kind of played into, because there was this heritage that they had. And there's nothing wrong with the heritage, but it there was portions where it kind of leaned a little bit more one way or another. Not anything out of God's will, just more tendencies of what we're focusing on. And so there is a part of that. And then it got more so when the Holy Roman Empire started in 800, and then it started spreading out, and Christianity, those dark ages, it was really because the knowledge of being able to read God's word and stuff was so protected, because they felt like the average person wasn't smart enough to figure out what God was saying. And they suppressed a lot of information. So then when it got free, and then the persecution was happening where they're going to be put to death, and so many of those early people that spread Christianity out throughout the Holy Roman Empire that were breakoffs from the Holy Catholic Church, as they spread out, they didn't want to share because they were worried about they were going to die. And so there wasn't a lot of collaboration on, hey, do I have this right? And so kind of both and. So yes, and we do the same thing today. I mean, when people come into churches, they're bringing their heritage with them, and some of that methodology isn't right or wrong.
Yeah.
It's just how they view it, and so that's fine. But we have to be careful about our preferences versus our what really is thus saith the Lord type thing.
Yeah, which kind of goes into going from, okay, we're talking a lot about human will and how they're interpreting God's will, which kind of dives right into what you talked about on Sunday, which is starting this series on God's will and what exactly that is. So in order to like narrow this down into like something specific, so God's will is an expansive term used to describe pretty much everything. It's often used as a dismissive term to describe something that a person is feeling. So I guess my first question is, what is God's will, and what is just people using the term to cope with their situation?
Our problem, especially in English, I think it's really like we can love pizza and we can love our wife, or we can make love to our wife, and it's all the same word, love. And it's like, what? And we do that with God's will, and we kind of throw it all into this one big pot. And what I'm trying to do through this series is break it out into a little bit of aspect. It's all connected, it's all God's will, but there's different aspects to it. And so there is the sovereign will, which is what everyone thinks of. Well, if God says it, that's just how it has to be type thing. And there is that. And there's God's moral will, which kind of breaks it down even farther. These are the rules you need to follow. But there's a whole lot of the God is okay with. And we're going to talk about that more in a couple weeks, where God's okay with whether you put ketchup on your hamburger or not. It's not God's will that you have to have ketchup, and that represents the blood of Christ, and I must have it on. I mean, people think you're psycho. I mean, that God doesn't, he doesn't care. And when you say, oh, God doesn't care, oh my God, God cares about everything, it's like, really? You're kind of putting God in this little tiny box that, well, he's already pre-decided that you have to do certain things a certain way, and you got to cook your food a certain way, and you got to make sure there's a little cross of ketchup on your hamburger or it doesn't count. It's like, it's not that way. And so all that to be said is we often add more to God's will than what there's really there. And just because you feel a certain way, or you were raised a certain way, so you have certain emotions about different things about God's will, we got to be careful about always categorizing into that first category that this is a sovereign will and there's nothing you can do about it, and that's just how it is. Because there's his personal will for your life, of things that only you can do, Luke, and things that he's called me to do. Because there's certain people I'm in contact with. I'm not in contact with the people you're in contact with.
Yeah.
And so you can influence them. I can never influence them because I'm never going to be around them, but you are. And so that's his personal will. There's his moral will, and then there's that, you know what, he's okay as long as you're not breaking his moral will or trying to go against his sovereign will, or trying not to go against, hey, he really wants you to talk to that person. You kind of know you're supposed to talk to him. As long as not that, if you want to put a cross in the form of a ketchup on your hamburger, or if you just want to eat a plain hamburger, it is all right. It's okay.
Yeah. So I guess to kind of break down this different pieces, now obviously you're going to go through a sermon series to kind of break down these different pieces individually. I just want to give like a general overview so that way everybody's on the same page. So I first want to talk about this sovereign will, because we've been talking a lot about like different theologies and all of that, and talking about like how to break from this mindset of, oh, that's just how it is, but also recognizing sometimes that is. So is there a difference between believing that God has a sovereign will and believing in predestination, which is the, oh, hey, it is what it is, I can never do anything in order to change God's will?
And so, yes, the sovereign will, that's things like he decided back before the foundation of the world that, you know what, I know people are going to sin, and so I'm going to send a Savior. I'm actually going to be the Savior for humanity, and I'm going to die on the cross. All that stuff, and you can read through the Old Testament, all the prophecies from Genesis chapter 3 on of how God was going to intervene. That was his sovereign will. There was nothing that Satan, nothing that they could do about how God was going to orchestrate that. Individually, there was a lot of different pieces that were moving and going through all that. And we'll just use a key person because everyone kind of goes back to this person, is King David. I mean, God chose him. That was God's will to choose David as king. But David made some poor choices as king. He did a lot of things right. And sometimes we don't talk about enough of the stuff he does right. But he did a few things that were totally against God's will. God gave him the permission, the ability to be able to go against God's moral will. So David got to choose, like when he committed adultery. That wasn't God's will. God didn't say, okay, David, you're going to mess this up and you're going to commit adultery. No. God's moral will, because that'd be going against God. Why would he force us to do sin if his will is the other? I mean, he's not going to force us to go against his will. That's just strange. And so God, he allows us to make those choices. He said, this is what I want you to do. It's very clear, thou shalt not commit adultery. It was written in stone on a tablet. I mean, there was no rocket science to this. I mean, it was very blatantly obvious. And then he committed murder, another one of the 10 Commandments, to cover it up. And it was like, okay, you broke 2 of the 10 Commandments. You lied about it, so I guess you broke another one. I mean, you're up to 3 now, and we could probably keep going, how he dishonored his mom and dad by doing this. I mean, how many? He probably ended up breaking all of them after you're all said and done. And why? Because God allowed him permissive free will to choose right or wrong. And he chose that way. And sometimes we can think that, no, God's already pre-decided everything, and you don't get a say in the matter. But no, throughout the Bible, we see that he gives us choices. Now, there's times, like, for example, with the Apostle Paul, when he was going on his second missionary journey, he was going and he wanted to go to Galatia and to go to Asia Minor and minister to them, and God said, nope. And he kept shutting door after door after door, and then he opened up the door he wanted to go through. That was God's sovereign will saying, no, I appreciate what you're wanting to do, but I need you to do this first. And then he ended up coming back and doing all of Asia Minor, but it started with, hey, you're going to go over here and minister to this place over here in Philippi first, and then you're going to come back here, but I'm shutting the door here. That's God working in a personal way and his sovereign way of saying this is how this is going to be. But he gives us a free will, and we can decide, I'm going to follow God or I'm not.
So how does one like cope and continue to like believe in God and like wrap their mind when they're struggling with this, like these thoughts of like, oh hey, it is like God's sovereign will, or God has control over everything, and like technically because he's allowing David to do all of these things, therefore he's still in control. Like, how can people like start to like process through that and like break it down to start thinking like you're thinking, I guess?
Okay, so God does not, his sovereign will is very specific, taking his plan from the beginning to the end, where we're going from Genesis to Revelation. His sovereign will is continually little guides all along the way to get there. All the steps in between, there's times where literally is like, okay, I can either allow you to choose is what I mean when I say allow that. Yes, it's his will that he's allowing you. So in a very, very, very broad sense, yeah, God allowed that to happen. But his will was that he was giving you free will. It wasn't his will that you got ran over by a car. It wasn't like, okay, I really want to mess with his life, so I'm going to cause him. Or in Paul's situation, where, you know what, a good 5 times of getting beat, 39 lashes, that would be good for him. I just think that's what we need to do. That is just sick. I mean, God's not up there, but does he take those things and redeem them? Oh yeah, he did with you, and he did with Paul, and he used those things for his glory. Can God redeem those things? Yes, but he still gives us free will to choose. And so his sovereign will was always getting played out in it, where people were coming to know Christ. It just wasn't always a direct boom, 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 because God's not moving us like chess pieces all the time, where you have no say, and, well, I guess I'm the sacrificial one, I'm going to get killed, so he's moving me as the pawn up here, and I'm going to get... No, that's not how it is. He lets us have that freedom to be able to choose, and not just us, but other people. So the people that took Paul out and stoned him, he allowed them to do something evil. He allowed the person who was driving the car, distracted or whatever, that ran over you, he allowed them to have the free will to do that. And when we stop taking away that free will and stuff, it gets really messy on and then we get frustrated with God because I'm blaming you now, God, because this bad thing has happened. And it's like, that's not God's fault. Could he stop it? Yes, he could make it, okay, I'm going to make this my sovereign will. For example, I'm going to part the Red Sea and let all my people through on dry land so they don't get killed by Pharaoh's army. He can intervene, but most of the time he allows us to have that free will. If it's furthering his sovereign will, then he'll intervene and do that. And sometimes we talk about it, we talked about King Hezekiah before, where he actually took the free will and said, you know what, Hezekiah, I'm actually going to postpone your death, and I'm going to give you more years to live. And it was like, wow, that is awesome. That wasn't God changing his sovereign will. That was God saying that permissiveness, you know what, I'm going to allow this to be different. And he has the right to do that, and sometimes he does, and sometimes he doesn't. Most of the time, he lets the world play out just with free will and the consequences of that.
I think the way that you described it earlier, and this is usually the way that I try to wrap my mind around it, with this aspect of free will, and the people who I've encountered that are like kind of operating under the if God is real, then like predestination sort of stuff of like this is how it has to be, and it's just whatever God decides is how it is. It kind of like makes like in their mind it seems like they think God made robots, and it's just like, okay, so like God is just making us do whatever we feel like doing, or whatever he feels like doing, and that makes it a lot easier for us to like process in our head than it is of like, oh hey, you're a human and you have all of these things.
Because you don't have to take responsibility yourself.
Yeah.
I can blame God for whatever happened in my life, that, well, I'm just this way because my parents were that way. And God gave me those parents, so I didn't have a say in it. So I'm blaming God because my dad abused me or whatever happened. And yeah, it relinquishes the responsibility if we can just blame God. No. And part of understanding God's will is that we have a say in some of it. That God's allowed us. I mean, from the very beginning, God allowed Adam and Eve to choose. He knew. Now, there's a difference. God's foreknowledge is something totally different. God knows what we're going to choose and not choose, and he has all that, but he still lets it play out. Mm-hmm. And so there's a difference between God knowing and God controlling. And sometimes we try to put, well, if his sovereign will is he foreknows everything, so therefore he forces everything to happen a certain way, and that's not how God works.
Yep.
If he wanted that, he would have made Adam and Eve, and they would have never sinned. But he wanted them to love him because they were choosing to follow him, just like we all get to choose whether we're going to follow him or not. And you can choose to follow and be in God's will, or you can choose to do life your way, and you're not in God's will.
Kind of to go back to God being our Father, like a parent knows, oh hey, if I leave out these cookies on the table, the kid's most likely going to be eating the cookies because that's just a kid being a kid. That doesn't mean that we know for a fact that the kid's going to eat the cookies and go do all those things, and the kid could decide that they're not going to eat the cookies. It's just having that foreknowledge of this is what happens. And it makes it a way easier to like wrap our mind around, oh hey, everybody in the world is like the robots from the Terminator. Because like that makes it me allowed to like have easy emotions, like I can just hate on that person or like
it's just the way
anger.
I was born. I don't have any say over it.
Versus, oh hey, it's a lot harder to deal with of, oh hey, this person could do something so terrible, but I technically could also do that. And that's really hard to like wrap your mind around of like, oh hey, I could be the person that ran me over with a car. That like makes you really have to think. Or I could be my parent who did all of these bad things to me. Like I could if I had those same experiences, but that might be what it is. That's really tough to really process through, which is why it's kind of like a coping mechanism or like a way to feel safe is, oh hey, it's just, this is God's will and God just wanted me to be the way I am and there's nothing I can do about it.
I think that's a big difference between someone who decides to follow Jesus and someone who learns about Jesus and like, nope, not having that, is that whole idea of coming to that realization that I have sinned. Not just all this bad stuff happened to me or I made a mistake. No, I chose to do that. And I didn't have to choose. I did. And it's just easier to blame other people and blame everything else on everything that's going on instead of just owning your part and saying, you know what, I did that.
Or just ranking it. It could be, oh hey, like I would never be the person who abuses my kids and like drinks alcohol and does all of these things, or I would never be the person who runs somebody over with a car because I'm like a safe driver going 15 miles into their hour for the speed limit. I just talk about people behind their back or get really angry at the person who's taking too long in the grocery line, but that's nothing compared to murdering somebody. That's why they're in jail.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to fall into that mentality of like, okay, but like how many times are you getting angry? Are you getting angry every second of every day and that person just killed somebody one time because they were touching their kid inappropriately? Like, okay, rank that on a scale of which one's worse. Because under God's eyes, if you're doing that, being angry 24/7 every day and this person murdered somebody one time, that's the same in God's eyes. At least to my understanding. Now, my next question would be, how do you practice discernment with God's moral will? And what I mean by that is like some things are not directly addressed by the Bible, and other topics are addressed, but like the morals are inferred based upon reading God's word.
I think a lot of it just has to do with knowing and studying and actually applying what's very clear. And as you do that, the other things that aren't necessarily specific, hey, you need to do this, you figure out because you start to learn the heart of God. And as you learn the heart of God and you're following what the clear parts, because there's a lot of, it's already in Scripture. When I say clear parts, that's stuff that's already written down that, hey, this is how you're supposed to live. You're not supposed to be selfish, but you're supposed to be generous. You're not supposed to be greedy, but you're supposed to help other people out. It's not all about you. You're not supposed to gossip, but you're supposed to encourage and uplift. And as you start to learn those things, as you're reading through, and it's not hard to find those things. There's tons of verses. Just open up the New Testament and start reading. There's gobs of things that, like, okay, I'm going to work on that. I mean, you don't even have to go very far. I mean, you can open up Matthew chapter 5, and he's like, you need to be salt, and you need to be light, and you need to love your neighbor. And as he goes through the whole Sermon on the Mount, you're like, wow. I mean, there's tons of things. It's not that hard. And then you start, okay, that's what I'm supposed to do. Start living that out. And when you start living that out, the other things that you're like, well, the Bible doesn't specifically say anything about that. Well, you learn, okay, yeah, but it fits in this category of stuff that it does say, you know what, I think this is what God wants. In the Restoration Movement, which is where our church is out of, it's where the Bible speaks, you speak, and where the Bible is silent, just keep your trap shut. You can have your own personal belief, but the Bible really doesn't say anything about, there's not a verse, anything possible about it. So it does not say I have to put a cross on my hamburger. Then, you know what, it's okay. I can do whatever. But I'm not going to force that and tell someone else they have to do it that way either.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I mean, in our generation, it'd be, you know what, it's okay whether you sing hymns or you can sing contemporary or you do what we do and we have a blended service. It does not matter. There is no thus saith the Lord in the Bible that says you have to do it this way. Songs, hymns, and spiritual songs. So, well, that kind of, I mean, that's everything.
Yeah.
And so it's okay. Whether you have instruments or no instruments, whether you have a full band or you have an orchestra, it does not matter. God doesn't say. So you do what you can do in your environment. That's what we do for ours, and that's what I think people need to do. So, just letting the things go that aren't, but the things that are there, I think there's enough there that we have to work on. People are very quick about focusing on the stuff. Well, God doesn't say anything about this. Well, stop arguing over that kind of stuff. Focus on all the things. There's hundreds of verses in there that tell you things you need to be doing. If you were working on those, the rest of the stuff will take care of itself.
So you said that we're not just saved from sin, but we are personally saved for something. How do we find that something?
I think a lot of that has to do with doing the stuff that he's already listed out. There's going to be special things that only you can do. And what I mean, not by your skill set, just by your life situation and the people that you're around and where you live and who your neighbors are and all that. And some of that you have no control over, but you're the only one that can do that. You're going to find what God wants you to do as you start doing the things that he's already showed us in his word. And when we start living the way he wants us to live, he'll start pointing out those things. I have people that come to me and they're like, well, God doesn't really talk to me. And I'm like, well, do you ever shut up and listen? Because if you go through the mindset of you wake up in the morning, God, show me. You pray and maybe even pray out loud. Hey, God, show me someone today that I can bless. And then you're looking for those opportunities. You're going to see them all over the place. But so many times, we're waiting for the skywriter in the sky, the finger of God to write up there, this is what I want you to do today. I want you to go and talk. And then we'd probably argue over, was that God's finger or was that actually a sky? That was probably for somebody else down the street. Because that's a big sky and it can be for anybody in the neighborhood.
You said specifically Jack Smith, but there's so many Jack Smiths, I don't know which one is
correct.
Your next door neighbor, Jack Smith, the one that you've been praying about for.
If there's
20 years.
something good that comes on in your mind that is something you should do, you just take that from God. Satan never tells us to do something good for somebody. So whether it's God's direct will or indirect will, or just because you're in tune with God's heart that it just popped into your mind, that's all good. Go do it. So if you think it, just go do it. And so whatever that is, and when you're looking for opportunities to bless, you'll be able to help bless and encourage and sometimes share the gospel with those around you.
So my next question is kind of, we've kind of been beating around the bush, so to say. God's permissive will. In my experience and the work that I do, that's the things that people are having the most trouble and the things that they're struggling with the most. I'm often asked, like, why do things happen to good people? Why do I have one more thing to deal with? And so my question is, how should we look at God's permissive will and the freedom of choice that he offers us?
Okay. If God's creating us, God is love. He created us. We are in his image. So he wants us to love. If you're forced to do something, if you're programmed where you can do nothing else, is that really love? Or is that just programming? And so God didn't want us to be just programmed. He wanted us to choose to love him. That's why there was a tree in the garden. He didn't have to put the tree in there, kind of like you talked about putting cookies. He didn't have to put the tree in there. He had to have something. They could do anything. He's like, eat from anything, do whatever, go have fun, make babies, whatever you want to do. Just don't eat from this tree. You can eat from the tree of life all day long. It has different fruit every month. It's pretty cool. But the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, don't eat. That's a one commandment. Only commandment they were given out of everything. Don't eat that. And he did that because he wanted them to choose. Are you going to choose me or are you going to choose you? And really, they weren't choosing to follow Satan. They were choosing to follow themselves. Hey, look, you'll become like God. Well, oh man, I'm going to be better. And so they were looking for what advantage they were going to get out of disobeying God, which ended up costing them everything. And so he wanted us to have free will to be able to love. The only way to do that is to allow people to make choices that aren't loving. They chose not to love God. They chose to love themselves, therefore over God. Therefore they disobeyed. Therefore death entered the world. Sin entered the world. All kinds of heartache, pain, their worth was cursed. All that stuff, all because of one decision. He gives us that choice. So because he gives us that choice, we still have that choice. We're kids of Adam and Eve, ultimately. And we still have that choice. God created us with that ability. And so the only way, because that's the only way it is, there is the ability for people to make bad choices. Which means good things are going to happen to bad people, and bad things are going to happen to good people at times. And that's just because you get to make a choice. So somebody can be, for example, good thing happened to a bad person. They do something wrong and they get this very gracious sentencing where they don't even have to spend time in jail, a little bit of community service. All right. That is something good happened to somebody that did something very bad. But then there's the opposite where somebody just, a little kid minding their own business gets raped by the next door neighbor. That's something bad happening to a good person. Why does God allow that? Because he gives us free will. If we don't have free will, we can't make those bad choices. But he wanted us to be able to choose to love him, and the only way he could do that is by allowing us to make good and bad choices. And so we live in a world full of people that make good and bad choices. And the ones that make bad choices can cause a lot of heartache for everybody. And the ones that make good choices make blessings on all kinds of people. So ultimately, the choice isn't why does God allow it? Let's just take it more personal. God allows you to make good choices or bad choices. What are you going to make? Because you're making the difference. You're made in the image of God. Are you going to show God by making good choices? Or are you going to show evil by making poor choices and hurt? Because ultimately, it's your free will. Which side are you going to go with?
To kind of make that, expand upon that further. So, like I shared previously, my job is working as a counselor at a counseling clinic. And what's really interesting about this good and bad choices is, like, I'm experiencing a lot of both in my clinic. To go specifically with, like, this rape situation, like, a little kid comes in and is raped, and if they have a bunch of support needs, all of their support needs met, if they have a loving family and a loving community that can, like, support them and, like, help them process through all of that, and everybody's just choosing to make good decisions and choosing to show God's love to that child and that family, then as that child grows up, that rape's not going to affect them very much. It might affect them some ways, but it's not going to affect them to the level that we would think. On the flip side, if the little child who was raped by somebody's bad decisions ends up having a family that is like, oh hey, don't talk about this, your feelings don't matter in this, it's only about me and how I have to deal with this, and then the person is allowed to live in their house, and then they grew up with a bunch more things where people are making poor decisions on their behalf, and then they grew up as an adult. Like, those are the people that are coming in my clinic because they've not had very many people make like loving decisions in their life, and so it's so easy for us to like fixate on like the first bad thing that happens in somebody's life. Like, we hung up on those moments. In my sermon, those were the enlightenment moments, the situations where something happens to make you start thinking. But after that, that's when, like, we've been talking about James, like, that's when James is like, look, that's when you have to be intentional with your choices and like actually prove that you believe, because if you're not doing any of this, then none of that matters. After you have that enlightenment moment, you can either choose to like be enlightened and like live out that life, or you can just sit there, be that robot that you want everybody else to be, and cause even more harm because you're just letting the bad decisions grow and expand and take over people's lives.
You can't control what other people do, and they can cause you good or they can cause you harm. You can control what you do. And so, to the best of your ability, especially as God followers, because we actually get the ability, if you're not a God follower, get there so you can be able to do this. But as you get that ability, you go and be that for someone else, and be that support network, and that, because I have seen it both ways, where someone who, since we're using the rape thing, because that's just such a horrific thing, I've seen that where it devastated a person to the point where as an adult they could barely function, and they did all kinds of horrible things because they felt worthless. And I've seen the opposite, where they actually went so far as not only to get past that, but they actually used that to help minister to other battered women. And it's like, how in the world? Well, that's because they're making the choice. Through the power of God, you're able to overcome those things. And because they had good people that were filling good things into them as well, letting God work through them, they're able to make a change. And so we need to be those conduits that are showing good. We have a choice. Are we going to do the good we need to do to whoever we need to do it to, or we're going to choose poorly? We get to choose. We can't choose what happens to us, but we can choose how we respond.
Yeah. Like, part of God's will is giving us the ability to recognize good from evil. Like, we're able to recognize, oh hey, like all of these things that we're like so upset about that are happening that we want to stop, that we're even asking God, why are we allowing this to happen? Like, use that frustration and all of those emotions for something good. Like, you can put all of that effort, instead of festering on like, why God, why are you letting all of this happen, to be like, oh hey, I'm going to do my best for all of these people who were abused, or all of these people who are living in homelessness right now, or all of these kids in the classroom that I want to make sure that they learn all of these stuff. Like, you can use all of that energy and like take care of all of those people. Like, for this person who was abused, they were working with battered women and were able to help so many people because they weren't focused on the, oh hey, why in the world did this happen to me, and oh hey, this action that was inflicted upon me was evil. Instead they were like, yeah, it was evil, and I can still make good out of this situation because God can restore anything, and I can make sure that nobody has to go through the same experience I do. And if they do, I'm here to support them and provide them with the support that I received or I did not receive when I needed it most.
God works all things out for the good to those who love him. So we need to allow him to do that. Be the conduit. Yep.
So to kind of wrap it up, because I really liked one of the scriptures that you pulled out that I kind of forgot about. So in the end of Genesis 50, we have Joseph kind of talking with his brothers after they find out, oh hey, you're Joseph, the dude that we just did so many terrible things to, and all of that. And Joseph responds by telling his brothers, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. Talking about the famine that's going on, and how he's seeing that God used his hardship for a specific purpose. And so I wanted to kind of ask, how can we respond like Joseph in Genesis? Because like the stuff that we're talking about of like turning these hard, heavy emotions into something good is hard. Like it's not easy to just be like, you know what, let's get over this terrible thing that's happened to me, or these terrible things that I'm seeing in the world happening. Like that's what Satan wants to happen. Satan wants us to be overwhelmed by all of this stuff. Joseph went through a bunch of terrible stuff and did not end up being overwhelmed and was put into these positions. So how can we respond like Joseph and not let these negative emotions like control us, and just be able to let them go?
So by the time Joseph said that, it had been over 2 decades since his brothers sold him.
No.
A lot of time had passed. It had been years since he had been in prison. Things that were changing, things that happened. He didn't think that verse out of chapter 50 back in chapter 37. He was like, what in the world's going on? The whole way being drug off as a slave, chained up, all the way to Egypt. He's like, what in the world's going on? But then what did he do? He knew, I didn't cause this. I'm not the one who sold, I didn't sell myself. But you know what? I'm going to make the best of the situation. So when he gets sold as a slave to Potiphar, what's he do? He does the best job he possibly can, and God blesses him for it. And he becomes basically second in command of all Potiphar's house. Then he gets accused of a crime he didn't commit, gets thrown in jail. Most people would have just crumbled and said, you know what, 2 horrific situations, I'm done. Curse God and die. That's not what he did. He went and he did the very best he could do and was put in charge of the whole jail. I mean, a prisoner put in charge of the jail. He's second in command of the jail. Why? Because he chose, I didn't choose this. I can't choose what things happen to me. People make bad choices. He didn't go blame God and say, well, God, you sold me into slavery. God, you threw me in jail. No, he said, I'm going to do what I need to do, which is I'm going to do the best. God wants me to, in all things, work for his glory. So I'm going to work hard. If I'm a slave for Potiphar, I'm working hard. If I'm a prisoner, I'm going to work hard for the warden. I'm going to do it. I mean, most people just be wallowing around in their thing, but that's not what he did. And because he chose, instead of blaming God, he chose to do the best with whatever circumstance. God then later used that for his glory, gave him a special ability to interpret dreams, and he was able to have all this stuff happen. Why? God's sovereign will, I'm going to take care of my people, and he used that through people's permissive will. They sold him stuff, and so God used Joseph, put him in a situation, and God redeemed him and had him there ahead, which is why he said, hey, God, you meant it for evil, but God brought about good. Now, did God want Joseph to be put into slavery? No. Did God want Joseph to be thrown in jail? No, that wasn't God. Oh, yeah, I'm going to zap him a couple times. No, that's not what it was about. But God took people's permissive will and brought about his sovereign will through that. And that's God's amazing talent, to be able to take his sovereign will of, hey, I'm protecting this nation. I'm protecting all of this future nation of what is now Israel. I'm protecting that, Israel's kids, by providing a path. But I'm not causing it. I'm letting people use their permissive will, and I'm just taking that and putting it into place later, which is so cool by God. So that's why no matter what happens, stop blaming God, start focusing on living for Him, even when the stuff I don't understand. Because Joe's like, I don't understand all this. I'm just going to do the best in the current situation today. He didn't know he was going to be king, or second in command, I guess, of all of Egypt. He wasn't like, oh yeah, if I just hold on a little long. No, he's like, I'm going to do the best in what I have today. Today is all I got. And we need to do the best with what you have. Today is what you got. And God will take care of the rest.
So when people are like saying like, okay, but I don't have 20 years to process through all of this, and I'm just like so miserable now because of all of this hard stuff that I've gone through. I don't want to wait 20 more years to finally be in a place to where I can feel comfortable and be able to like live in the moment and not let all of these negative emotions control their lives. How can like that person find that support they need in that moment to be able to get to that point where 20 years in the future they're able to look back and see all of the ways that God used them during their times of need?
I really think we're going to talk about this on Sunday.
Okay.
But really has to do with do what you know is God's will right now. That's just it. And so Joseph, he knew how he's supposed to act. So he did that in the situations, and bad things happen. I'm sure there's times where he was so frustrated with, I don't understand this, God. I don't get it. But instead of blaming God and being like, okay, I just give up, he's like, I know you want me to live a certain way, so I'm going to live to the best of my ability that way in the moment right now today. He wasn't thinking 20 years down the road. He's like, I'm getting through today. And then when tomorrow happens, it's going to be, I'm getting through today. And then when tomorrow happens, I'm getting through today. It's not, well, if I just keep going, because each of those is a step. And looking back 20 years later, he was able to say, yeah, I get it, which is why he was able to say to his brothers, hey, you know what? There's a lot of evil that was going on here. But God was working all things out for the good of those who love Him. I just focused on each day loving God and doing what I was supposed to do. And now I can look back and see His hand in all that and how He was with me. Where I could have very easily went to the wrong person and been thrown, but yet I was sold to the chief temple guard for Pharaoh. I could have been to anybody, but God's hand was in there. Should have been put to death for the crime that I was told I committed that I didn't, but I wasn't. And I was still in Potiphar's house, and I was still in Pharaoh's jail right there in the capital city. I mean, he was still working out all those things, even though the bad things were happening. And so he took one step at a time and then was able to look back. And sometimes we just want it fixed. And so I want to be able to look back right now and say, yeah, everything's good. And that's not how it works. It's, I'm doing today. I'm going to love God and do what I know to do today. And then tomorrow I'm going to do the same thing. And tomorrow, and then when we look back, we're like, wow, look how far I've come. But it's because I took one step, and was focused on that step. Stop focusing on tomorrow. Focus on today. It doesn't mean you don't prepare for stuff, but that's a whole other thing. It's just do it today. Do God's will today. And you'll find out when you look back 20 years from now, wow, I see what God was doing.
Well, thanks for really breaking down what God's will means, and I look forward to hearing more of the week-by-week breakdown of, oh hey, what is God's will looking like in each of these different aspects. But I really think, after speaking with you, it seems like what's important to remember is that we also have a will that God has gifted us, to where when we're having these moments of oh hey, I feel like this is just how it is and there's nothing I can do about it, and all of these bad things are just going to happen and there's nothing that I can do. Especially now in today's political realm, it seems like that's just what the powers that be are wanting us all to be feeling like. What we need to remember is that God gave us the ability to be the good we want to see in the world. And so we need to remember in these moments where we're feeling like wanting to just let the overwhelming feelings take over us because they're so overwhelming, if we are able to act out God's faith and demonstrate or allow Him to use His love to restore others, that love can help restore us and help us continue to live out His will, even if we're not recognizing it in the moment.
Okay.
So thank you for sharing today.
You're welcome.